Happy Friday the 13th, the unluckiest day of the year for most, but for me it always meant a day-long marathon with my favorite hockey mask slasher, Jason Voorhees. So I figured to celebrate this day, which also just so happens to take place in the spookiest month of the year, I would rank each and every single bone-breaking, throat-slashing, eye-gouging death in the entire franchise from worst to best. I, however, won't be counting things like the space station that explodes in Jason X, or any kills made by Freddy in Freddy vs. Jason, but the many deaths of Pamela Voorhees, Jason Voorhees, and Roy—
How's it hanging, everybody?
Morning, Roy.
Yeah, hi, Roy.
will all be included. The deaths won't be ranked necessarily on how gory they are, but mostly just how creative or interesting they may be. A lot of the kills shown will also be massively edited down due to YouTube censorship, so apologies for that. Also, obviously, massive spoilers for the entire franchise, so if you don't want to be spoiled, well, now's your warning. And with that out of the way, these first few deaths are all just pure stupidity from the characters involved. None of them are actually killed by the slashers, instead they either go out by their own hands, or take someone else out because they're just an idiot. After awaking Jason from his slumber because she can't take her hands off her boyfriend, Kinsa attempts to escape the spaceship through a shuttle, only to forget it's still docked, and thus causing it to crash like the moron she is. Jessica Kimball, who is Jason's niece that he all of a sudden has, stabs the sheriff, who she thinks is Jason, because Jason can now switch bodies all of a sudden, which is a thing in this movie. While searching for Jason on a cruise ship, someone thought it would be a smart idea to give a near blind guy a shotgun, which ends very poorly for a crew member when he's mistaken for Jason. A poor diner patron who only wanted the soup of the day gets blasted by a gung-ho waitress only moments after being put through a table by Jason. After Rennie mows down Jason in a New York and definitely not Vancouver alleyway, she sees baby Jason, who she also tries to run over. All this does is cause a car accident and an explosion that kills one of her teachers. The next crop, or what I like to call the reveal. You never see these characters killed off, but as the film is coming to a close, our heroine just so happens upon their bodies. When Ned isn't playing practical jokes on his friends, he likes to spend his spare time lying in bunk beds with his throat slashed. While swinging on a rope from a barn, Fox suddenly disappears, only to be found with a pitchfork sticking out of her neck so they can take full advantage of the 3D effects. Mocking the murdered son of your deranged coworker doesn't work out too well for one paramedic. Poor nerdy guy Roy goes out for a fun day of paintballing and ends up being dismembered by Jason. A couple FBI agents are murdered after openly mocking a now body-hopping Jason Voorhees. And is that the Kane Hodder I see, who also just so happens to play Jason Voorhees? After calling a shackled Jason ugly, this soldier gets what's coming to him for being so rude. Being the not-so-talented son of Bing Crosby is one thing, but not being able to seal the deal with a couple lovely ladies during a game of strip Monopoly is another, so being turned into a pincushion for arrows is well-deserved. If Dr. Matthew had been better at his job, maybe most of the kids in his care wouldn't have wound up dead. His poor performance in his position earns him a well-deserved rail spike in the noggin. George is one of the only likable characters in the fifth film, and what does he get for caring for his grandson? His eyes gouged out. Poor Brenda somehow gets thrown through a window by a little old lady, but she was the one who suggested they play strip Monopoly, so because of her promiscuous ways, she had to go. Random soldier lady on the lookout for Jason comes out swinging. Security guard for Weston Hills Psychiatric Hospital decides to investigate very loud banging and gets crushed for his stupidity. Wade learns a valuable lesson: never touch Jason's weed crop.
What the fuck? What is that?
This creepy space cowboy must have said something about Jason's mom because it looks like he was put through a wood chipper. Poor Anita gets an off-screen death after enjoying a lovely duet with her boyfriend Demon.
Hey, baby.
Ooh, baby. Ooh, baby. In his self-sacrificing move, Waylander blows part of the ship up with explosives to save the others, but a tiny little explosion is no match for Uber Jason. Two of the dumbest deaths in the series, Sergeant Brodsky kills Uber Jason and himself by hurtling the two of them towards a nearby planet where they burn up upon re-entry. A good chunk of these next kills are nearly completely bloodless and feature cutaways just as you're about to get to the money shot, like for example Steve Christie here, who gets his for restarting the camp, despite Mrs. Voorhees' many attempts to keep it shut down.
Oh, hi. What are you doing out in this mess?
Fan favorite Terry, and I don't think I need to explain why, gets hers after being spied on skinny dipping by Creepy Scott. After putting on some very sensual brown underwear, sweet little Vicky gets put down by Baghead Jason when all she really wanted was a definitely not gay man. He's gay.
Sandra.
One half of the Doublemint twins, Terry, gets speared through the back after her sister tells her to get lost because she's busy getting some action. Mrs. Jarvis, a loving mother, gets her off-screen death, and all she was doing was looking for her missing kids. Baby Tina offs her father with her spooky telekinetic powers after her parents were having a little disagreement. Don't worry though, he comes back at the end, and it's really stupid. Russell, the annoying preppy guy, gets ready for a little fun with his girl when Jason Voorhees decides to ask him a question. Maddie just wanted to doll herself up and be like the popular girl Robin. Why she decided to walk off in the woods like that is anyone's guess, but she gets a sickle to the throat for her troubles. Also, Jason seems to struggle with it for a second. After her boyfriend goes out looking for the birthday boy, Kate gets a party horn in the eye, and the honk it makes always makes me laugh. Super dork Eddie gets necked by a machete after getting struck down by Melissa. Jason comes up behind a deckhand piloting the cruise ship when he decides to give him a few little pokes. Part 8's Prophet of Doom tries warning everyone and gets an axe in his back for his troubles. Scumbag Jojo gets his head bashed in after a near, we'll say, assault of Rennie. Random cop gets hugged to death after attempting to call for backup. Edna arrives late for her get-together with the deputy and has one of the funniest deaths in the entire series. Whoever did the editing for this deserves an award. Creighton Duke tries to get revenge for the murder of his girlfriend, instead he gets his back broken. After Jason somehow escapes from his shackles, he goes full John Wick on a few guards, even making one of them shoot their own man. Another soldier feels the wrath of Jason and is blasted through a metal door. I don't know what Beanpole Azrael was thinking when he jumped on Jason's back, but he gets Bret Hart's signature backbreaker for his efforts. One of the most insufferable characters in Freddy vs. Jason, Kia gets hers after Kelly Rowland can no longer improvise dialogue on the spot. But why does she wave her arms around so frantically? It just looks stupid. What you think will end up being the final girl, Jenna, ends up getting stabbed with a machete in one of the most anticlimactic kills in the series. After Jason has a one-on-one with telekinetic Tina, her father comes back from the dead to drag Jason back into the lake, with what looks to be only a bit of dirt on his face, even though he's been in that lake for at least a decade. Another stupid Jason death takes place in the 8th entry when the sewers of New York suddenly become filled with toxic chemicals, which is apparently a normal occurrence in this universe. Oh, and then Jason is just suddenly turned into a little boy. A third stupid Jason death in a row, Jason gets sent to hell after a magical dagger is kicked in his chest by his niece, which only she can do because they're blood relatives, which causes weird hands to come from the ground and pull Jason to the underworld. It's dumb, but it did lead to the final shot, which showed Freddy's glove pulling Jason's mask to hell, which was always fun. Barry and Claudette get what's coming to them from a very angry Mrs. Voorhees after they decided to explore each other rather than make sure Jason could swim. Security Sven gets taken off to the side so Jason can give him a little neck adjustment. Private Dallas gets his face bashed into the wall, but why does it make a sound like his face is rubbing against the metal wall when he's nowhere near it? A random partygoer at a rave tries to get all up in Jason's face and has his head spun around for good measure. Body swap Jason breaks into a police station to find his niece and ends up smashing a cop into some lockers, which makes a really cartoony squish sound effect. Robin, the cool girl, gets hers after belittling what is supposed to be her friend Maddie, but if you look closely, Robin suddenly turns into a man when she's tossed out the window. A cop gets his head crushed after saving a little girl. No gore, but some crunchy sound effects always go a long way. 70s hippie Chuck, in 1982, goes down to find out why the power is out, only to be thrown into the fuse box and electrocuted, but it looks like the actor has no idea what to do with his hands. Poor Elizabeth gets a spear to her noggin, simply so the producers can make an American Express joke, which I'm sure doesn't go over the heads of today's audience. After being an asshole the entire movie, Dr. Cruz is about to get his in a really gruesome way, only for the camera to cut away just as it's about to get good. Professor Lowe stupidly thinks all Jason wants is his machete back, and for that, well, the next time we see him, Jason is carrying his head. Immediately following the discovery of the professor's head, Jason decides to smash Trevor's face into an electrical panel. During a pre-credits sequence, Mrs. Voorhees gets her head lopped off for the second time in the series, but not as fun as in the first movie. The coroner in this dies the moment he becomes possessed by Jason. And how does he become possessed? Well, he eats Jason's still beating heart. This is a weird movie, but it only gets weirder. Jason then hops bodies again to a deputy, killing him in the process, but not before some really weird shaving scene. The third body swap scene has Jason switching from the deputy to scummy reporter and ex-boyfriend of his niece, Robert Campbell. This also causes the deputy's body to melt, but I can't show any of that on YouTube. We then have a fourth body swap that were never shown, but Randy Parker is the final victim, and he ends up getting his throat cut, which forces out a little demonic baby, monster, Jason thing, I have no idea. Jason shows off his impressive throwing skills when he gets his sister in the back with a knife sharpener. Another showing of his throwing prowess as he chucks a dart right in the forehead of a cop. Skinny dipping in a Friday the 13th film is never a great idea, something Sandra learns a little too late in this homage to Jaws. After just escaping Freddy, Blake wakes back up to find his father whose head pops off like a parakeet, and then Jason takes a swing at Blake, and again because of bad editing, stops way before he makes contact. Wayne is in for the shock of his life as Jason throws him onto some electrical equipment, but why does his crotch immediately burst into flames? The admiral for the cruise ship gets his throat cut, but how? The blade is a country mile from even coming close to it. Tina's poor mother, who just wanted to find her daughter, ends up getting stabbed in the back while Cruz holds her in place. This is why Cruz deserved a much harsher death than what he got. The deputy probably should have just let things be instead of chasing Jason off into the woods. For barging into Jason's home, he gets a hammer to the skull. Sure, mentally ill Joey just wanted to share his candy bar and probably didn't deserve getting an axe to the back, but don't feel too sorry for Joey because the actor that played him is one of Corey Haim's alleged abusers. Just as they're about to have a little fun, Steven and Annette witness Jason doing a little slicing and dicing and somehow think they're gonna get away on their tiny little scooter. Charles just seemed to have it in for his niece Rennie through the entirety of this movie, so when he finally gets his, it's a bit of a letdown. Another window toss and a drowning in an open sewage drum, which I guess are just everywhere in New York according to this movie. Poor Deputy Stubbs lights up when Jason sends 10,000 volts coursing through his system. If only people had listened to Crazy Ralph, none of this would have happened and Ralph himself wouldn't have met his end in part 2.
It's got a death curse.
Billy Boy was just trying to enjoy a nice night of nose flurries and a lovely young lady when Roy decided to drive an axe in his head. And how could you blame him? That bald spot is like a glowing target. Darren learns a lesson in aerodynamics after Jason sends him launching with a spear, and the way his body goes flying always elicits laughter from me. After claiming alcohol will be the death of him, Jason proves this to be correct by smashing his bottle and driving it straight into his gut.
Some folks have a strange idea of entertainment.
A random sanitation worker gets a wrench to the skull for his troubles, although it's mostly off-screen with just a little blood splatter. Linderman tries to make a heroic rescue only to get tossed into the wall and later just bleed out. A dumb stoner helps awaken Jason from his slumber and gets a full gutful of machete for his trouble. Another grunt in Jason X meets their demise, this time by a quick neck slice that we don't get an immediate payoff for. Ward goes outside to check on some commotion, where he's met by Jason, who proceeds to break his arm, which is pretty nasty, and then throw him into a door, which I guess is what ultimately kills him. A random graduate climbs a ladder to do something, when he's just chucked right off and gets impaled on an antenna. When Ben goes out looking for his buddy Michael, he instead finds Jason, who crushes his head with his bare hands. Originally much more graphic, but this movie is notorious for how much the MPAA butchered it. A trio of paintballers meet the same fate as their buddy Roy when confronted by Jason. Annoying greaser Pete, who we've known for 2 minutes, gets his after being insufferably annoying. If Edna had just stopped harping on Harold, she may have come out of this one alive. Instead, she gets a knitting needle in the back of the skull. Some more Part 3 fun, and they were really trying anything and everything with this 3D gimmick, including a pitchfork in the stomach. If Hippie Girl hadn't spent 90% of the movie high, she may have made it out, but instead she gets a hot fire poker in the belly for good measure. All David wanted was a late night snack for his munchies. Instead, he gets gutted like a fish.
Maddie?
Susanna just witnessed a psycho and a mass killer boyfriend, so decides to play a game of hide and go seek, which she's not very good at. I don't know what the filmmakers had on David Cronenberg to have him be a part of this film, but at least they gave him a somewhat decent death. Poor Kelly Hu gets choked to death by Jason, but the really bad part is how hard her stunt double gets thrown to the ground. Also, this woman does not age. After Ginny manages to outwit Jason, she's able to take him out with a well-placed swing from a machete, which definitely killed Jason forever and he never came back again. While many don't seem to like Shelley, I sure do, and it's always sad to see the prankster get killed off screen and just randomly show up later. Without him though, Jason doesn't get his iconic mask. Final girl Chris makes her last stand against Jason and drives an axe right in his face. While not the goriest, it's still a pretty iconic death of Jason Voorhees. A random hitchhiker gets offed in Part 4, but it's not even the blood and gore I find gross, it's the half-eaten banana coming out of her mouth that always does me in. Learn to chew with your mouth closed. After her bald boyfriend takes an axe to the noggin, Lana decides to show off her goods, to herself, and then takes an axe to the gut for good measure. One thing I've learned from the franchise is don't be a peeping Tom, otherwise you'll end up on the wrong end of a hunting knife. The last of the paintballers from Part 6, and this guy is too busy ranting about how women should stay in the kitchen to notice a hulking hockey-masked killer standing in front of him. The smiley face he leaves on the tree, and Jason looking at his arm like a confused puppy, always cracks me up. Sissy just wanted to play a prank on one of the guys, and instead gets her head twisted off. Jane was about to bring Michael to a surprise party when the real surprise is Jason Voorhees with a tent spike. I think we all need to relax every now and then, but it's hard to when a psychopath is wandering your cruise ship and rams a hot rock in your stomach. Another grunt in space meets his match with Jason, but the CGI effects of his half-missing body aren't the greatest. Jason gets offended when some hillbilly makes fun of how he looks and handles the situation about how you would expect.
What the That shit ain't fucking right, dude. What the fuck?
Officer Brack takes a fire poker to the eye, which feels like a cheap imitation of a better death from Part 3. Often eliciting laughter from most, Rob's death in Part 4 I always found to be disturbing. It's not graphic, and I know Rob screaming "he's killing me" over and over seems unrealistic, but it was based off a news article the director read about where a man who was being stabbed shouted out, "Please stop hurting me, please stop killing me," and this always stuck with me and made his death seem much more tragic. From a more realistic death to one of the more absurd, the second greaser guy from the fifth film gets a mouthful of road flare, and look at that sweet dummy head. One of the more memorable characters, Ethel, the ultimate Karen, gets a cleaver to the face while she's making a nice home-cooked meal. Look at her reaction though, hilarious. After getting turned down by the love of his life, Jake too gets a meat cleaver to the face, and well, he does eventually wind up in bed with his romantic interest, just not how I'm sure he imagined he would. John Travolta's nephew seems to be a hit with the ladies. It's just a shame Jason doesn't like his choice in music. Jason isn't too pleased with this random camper in his woods, so he rams his fist through him, and just to make sure he's really dead, Jason also breaks his neck, which I feel is a little overkill. You should never scare your girlfriend and openly mock an undead killer, because he may just come back to jam a harpoon gun in your gut. Jason scores a twofer when he bashes two cops' heads together. Nothing more beyond that. Random camper gets slashed by Jason after having to listen to her friends get busy. I guess you really aren't safe anywhere when Jason is around, as he'll even stab you through the floorboards. All Harold wanted was to play with his bunny and eat some peanuts, but no, his wife had to non-stop nag. Well, at least Jason put him out of his misery with a cleaver to the chest. This poor nurse just had to deal with pervy Axel, and now she gets a scalpel ran through her by what was supposed to be a dead Jason Voorhees. Sweet Sarah was finally about to be intimate with her boyfriend for the first time, but you can't be doing that around Jason. I would also like to know how long he waited outside for her to get near that door, and just how damn fast was he throwing that axe. You know, Violet was just minding her own business, dancing to some tunes, and I feel her death wasn't justified. Wait, did she make one too many place settings for breakfast? Yep, she definitely deserved to go. One of the few to go toe-to-toe with Jason, Sheriff Garris wasn't about to let Jason go after his baby girl, but ends up paying the price when he gets folded in half. Is it just me, or does being attacked while you're naked seem so much worse than if you were clothed? Tamara wasn't the nicest person by any means, but her death from a broken glass shard seemed rather cruel. The two restaurant owners went from serving Jason patties to being placed on the menu themselves when Jason dunks one in the deep fat fryer and smashes the other in the face. The fryer one is a particularly nasty way to go. Whoever thought to let Jason go wild at a rave was a genius. However, what the hell is with the terrible editing? Jason swings at this guy, completely missing him and hitting a keg. Then it cuts, and for a second the guy forgets he was supposed to be cut as well. It's a sloppy but fun scene. Piloting a boat is always a good time, but doing it with an arrow lodged in your brain always adds another layer of complexity. Trent is the big jerk in the movie that you're just waiting to see get his. When it finally comes, sure, it's violent, but it's such a huge letdown. They couldn't have thought of anything more interesting for such an unlikable character, and I don't mean unlikable like, oh, he's the bad guy and we shouldn't like him. No, I mean he's so annoying, it makes you want to turn the movie off. Junior is another annoying character, but his death, even though sillier and less convincing, is still more entertaining than Trent's. If it weren't for those damn enchiladas, Demon may still be there for his little brother Reggie, but I can't blame Roy for wanting to put an end to that awful singing. After Robin straight up laughs in Jake's face for even thinking he has a shot with her, Roy takes it upon himself to thrust a machete straight through her bunk bed. Upon discovering the body of his girlfriend, Paul swims back to the dock only to get a spear gun straight to the groin, making all men wince in unison. Tommy finally gets one up on Roy, sending him plummeting to some kind of spike contraption. I don't know what that is, but it doesn't look like typical farming equipment to me. If you ever needed a reason why you should not hitchhike, then the very first Friday the 13th has you covered. Little Annie made the mistake of being picked up by Mrs. Voorhees, which leads to one of the most iconic murders in the entire series. Scotty was a bit of a perv. Watching Terry skinny dip and then stealing her clothes, I guess falling into one of Jason's traps and a quick pass of a sharp machete served him well. Seemingly killed earlier in the film, Ali is quickly offed with a quick removal of his hand and then complete dismemberment by Jason Voorhees. Teddy Boy spent the entirety of the movie trying to get laid, only to wind up with a knife in the back of his skull. Maybe he should have ran that through his computer. You think being possessed by Freddy is bad? How's about waking out of your possession just as Jason is slicing you in half? Now that's gotta suck. Another one brave enough to go one-on-one with Jason Voorhees. This grunt throws a sweet crane kick and a nice spinning back elbow, but it isn't enough and he gets screwed for his efforts. Hey, can I copy your homework? Sure, just don't make it look obvious that you copied. I'm not saying being shoved on antlers was a ripoff of Silent Night Deadly Night, but I'm not saying it was. Being stabbed in the throat with a screwdriver would be really horrific, but what makes it even worse is just how slow the whole thing goes. It's like Jason gets off on this shit. A one-on-one showdown between Jason and Tommy gives us a boat propeller that eats half of Jason's face and a watery grave that he won't soon return from, until Tina awakens him with her telekinetic powers because she thinks it's her father. Jason has always had excellent throwing skills, and he proves it once again with an axe thrown to the back. He isn't finished though, as he spins his victim around and drives that axe head straight through his chest. I love the visual of Jason throwing a flaming machete. The only problem I have with this excellent kill is the guy running with a mouthful of fake blood. He comes out, and instead of screaming, he makes these mumbled noises and has this stupid look on his face as he waits to spit out the fake blood. Mrs. Voorhees' death is next, and for the time it was pretty shocking. Sure, now with HD you can see she has hairy knuckles because it's actually a man, and there are toothpicks that were holding the fake head in place, but still, given the time and everything, it was still well done. Alice, the survivor of the first film several years later, meets her maker when Jason Voorhees, somehow alive and somehow capable of tracking her down, jams an ice pick in her skull. The worst part of all of this, the actress Adrienne King had a real-life stalker at the time, and she had to fake getting killed on screen. Holmes is not a good guy, so to see him get his will never not be cathartic. Using the same syringe Holmes used on Rennie, Jason shoves it right through him, but just how long is that thing? After Jason's first body jump, he kills another coroner who was just making fun of him. How many times do people need to be told Jason is a sensitive boy and has feelings too? Just as Gabriella is about to be killed by Freddy, Jason steals his kill along with a would-be rapist who just gets launched into orbit. Honestly, I think this kill was included simply to get more nudity for the film. The original toss out of the window kill, and this one is done so much better than the one from part 7. It feels way more impactful having her land on the roof of a car than just a soft patch of dirt. Getting caught in a bear trap would be beyond painful, but at least Jason puts the guy out of his misery with a quick swipe of his machete. This death has to be an homage to the zombie from Dawn of the Dead, which was done by Tom Savini, but this is just me speculating. Jason Goes to Hell is a ridiculous movie, and in the first 10 minutes of the movie, Jason gets completely destroyed by the FBI. I mean, they even drop a bomb on him, which I never knew was something they could get their hands on. While this one isn't gory, it's still a lot of fun, as Nikki gets pulled into the bathroom and has her face shoved right into the RV wall, making a perfect impression of her face. After finding her boyfriend's mutilated body, Debbie gets a knife in the back, and to make matters worse, this counts as 2 deaths because she was also pregnant. Samantha is just enjoying a relaxing skinny dip in her inflatable raft when Jason appears from below, and well, that's all she wrote. But what is up with her reaction? This has to be one of the more sadistic deaths in the franchise. Imagine being strung up and cooked alive inside a sleeping bag. What a horrible way to go. You know, if it wasn't for Tommy needing to see Jason's rotting corpse, his friend may still be alive. Instead, he gets Jason's hand shoved through his chest and his heart torn out. What a great friend Tommy is. Melissa is such a miserable person that when Jason comes knocking at the door, you actually cheer. I also get a good laugh when he just throws what's supposed to be a lifeless body across the room. You know Jason is a good old country boy, so when a hot rocker chick comes around playing the devil's music, you know she's in for a bad time. No matter what you do, Jason just can't die. Even the vacuum of space can't keep him down, and he proves this by literally punching a hole through the hull of a spaceship from the outside, which causes one unfortunate crew member to get sucked out. A little wash up after a little bit of Kevin's bacon, Marcy receives an axe to the face in another iconic death in the series. Some more post-coital relaxation with this death from part 5. Now, I don't need to mention why this scene is so well remembered, but an eye gouging with garden shears is always a rough way to go. Paula, who is the sweetest character in the film, seems to get the most brutal death. I don't know what Jason has against her, but it's so violent. Also, just how much blood is one body supposed to have? Jimbo finally gets over his dry spell with the ladies, and what does he get for it? A corkscrew in his hand and a cleaver in his skull. Also, for some reason, Jason crucifies him in a doorway, which is really weird, but I don't see how you could do this to a man with these dance moves. These two lovebirds really become inseparable when Jason decides to skewer both of them with a spear during a moment of passion. Great kill, but it's a shame that it's a blatant rip-off of a kill from the movie Bay of Blood. After finding his girlfriend's body, Eddie gets his face crushed with a leather strap, although it's kind of funny because at one edit, Roy's tightening the strap in the opposite direction, which would have made it looser, but you know, who's nitpicking. Hands down the best kill in the 10th film, and the only one most people even remember. But it is awfully close to a bit from the X-Files episode Roland. This might be one of the funniest deaths in the franchise that always gets a reaction from people when they first see it. It's so simple, yet so effective and downright hilarious. Trey's death could easily top any list as it's so over the top. Jason just repeatedly goes to town with his machete, even though it looks like he's a good 5 feet or so away from the body. But it doesn't stop there when Jason folds the bed in half, which is really the cherry on top. Kevin Bacon's death for me is the most memorable death in the first film, and I think it's part of the reason the movie is so well remembered. If Kevin had not become the bigger star he would, maybe it wouldn't be as effective, but still, I think it's easily one of the best in the series. Julius is one of only 4 or 5 to fight Jason hand to hand, and he holds his own for the most part. However, he should have worked on his cardio more as he gasses out rather quickly, leaving himself open for a one-hit KO. Doug was finally going to be spending the night with his girlfriend when Jason puts an end to that one real quick as he crushes Doug's pretty face against the shower wall. Trying to get everything they can out of their 3D gimmick, Jason crushes Rick's head, which forces his eye to come shooting out at the camera. Yeah, it looks silly as hell, but that's part of the charm. Another one taking advantage of the 3D gimmick, we get the debut of Jason with the hockey mask, and Vera, who somehow confuses tall, slim Jason for short, pudgy Shelly, takes a spear straight to the eye. Another Part 3 entry makes its way as Andy does some walking on his hands, which gives a great angle as Jason comes down on him with his machete, slicing him in two. Jason's death in Part 4 has to be the most violent. I mean, he's hit in the face with a machete, which he then slides down while his tongue sticks out, and then Tommy notices he isn't dead yet, so he just starts to hack away at Jason's body. It's pretty gross, but they really were treating this film as it was going to be the last, and this was how they were going to finally kill Jason off for good. Nothing like having a street sign shoved through your torso during a moment of intimacy. This could be argued as the best death in the series, and I could easily put it there any day of the week. For being part of such a terrible movie, they at least got some things right. The death is highly edited for the R-rated version, so if you want to see the whole thing, you need the unrated version. When Coroner Axel isn't being a pig or trying to sleep with nurses next to dead bodies, he's also having a hacksaw rammed through his neck and his head twisted completely around. This is one of my favorites because it's just so brutal and happens so quickly. The saw or neck break would be fine on their own, but no, Jason wasn't f***ing around in this one. This is one of my favorites, and for the purpose of this list, I put it at number 1. It's not particularly gory or anything, but the sudden impact of the machete to Mark's face, and then the way he falls back down the stairs in his wheelchair is so memorable. Sure, it doesn't really make sense, but it still really works and is just an all-around great moment in the franchise. Alright, so that's all of them. I know people will mention the sleeping bag part from Jason X or the beginning of Freddy vs. Jason, but those were holograms and nightmares respectively. This list was a lot tougher than I thought it was going to be, but I wanted to do something fun for Friday the 13th. There are a lot of these that I could switch around because they're so similar, but I think for the most part I'm happy with it. But I'm curious, what are your top 10? Your top 5? Do you agree or disagree with any of my choices? And if you enjoyed the video, would you want me to do the same with other franchises like Halloween, Nightmare on Elm Street, etc.? Anyways, let's keep this spooky train rolling, and I will see you in the next video.
Happy Friday the 13th.